Well, it's still morning. Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. Our city government is built on a foundation of trust. Trust that when you call 911, a firefighter or paramedic or police officer will do their best to help you in your time of need. Trust that when you turn on the faucet, clean water will come out. Trust that when you leave your home in the morning and drive on our streets, that you can get safely to work. And most of all, our government is built on the idea that you can trust your elected officials to be honest and to look out for your interests rather than their own. Our first job as city leaders is to prevent breakdowns in that trust. And if we fail, we are expected to respond strongly and swiftly. We have seen too many Dallas leaders engaged in improprieties. Sometimes these cases can feel like deja vu. My own career in public service, in fact, began a decade ago, in part because of a wide-ranging public corruption case that involved both city and state elected officials who represented Dallas. It's true that no ethics code would have prevented some of their actions. It's possible that even the most stringent ethics code wouldn't have stopped their behavior. The failings that we have seen in recent years were ultimately moral failings, and they were federal crimes, not just ethical lapses or ticky-tack rules violations. But rarely do public leaders lose their way all at once. Experience tells us that people don't simply jump into the deep end of the ethical swamp. They stick their toes in first. Then they don't face consequences. They wade in a little bit and a little bit more until they're overtaken by corruption. Our city must strive to create a culture of ethical behavior and compliance. We must be able to show our residents, the people of this great city, that they can rely on those of us who hold the awesome responsibilities that they've entrusted us with. Under former mayors Tom Leppert and Mike Rawlings, past city councils made strides in revamping our city's ethics code. And I feel confident that our current council members, some of which have joined me here today, are committed to ethics reform. But we need help in creating the very best ethics code possible. I believe we have significant issues with our code that need to be addressed. We also can't afford to make our ethics code so onerous and complicated that a person acting in good faith will nevertheless find it difficult to comply with, or make it so vague and without teeth as to be meaningless. Everyone should know and should clearly understand what is in bounds and what is out of bounds. And I don't believe the onus should fall entirely on the public to find and prosecute ethics violations. We can and we must do better in this city. And that is why today I'm announcing that I've appointed Tim Powers to serve as our city's ethics reform czar. Mr. Powers is the managing partner of the international law firm Haynes & Boone, and I recently appointed him to serve as the chairman of our city's Ethics Advisory Commission. Chairman Powers has a brilliant legal mind, and I believe he is well qualified and uniquely suited to do this work for us. As Ethics Reform Czar, Chairman Powers will form a small working group to collect and review information and report back a series of recommendations. Before the end of the current council term next June, I want the Dallas City Council to take up those recommendations and adopt a new code, one that has teeth and one that is easy to understand and to comply with. Our residents expect this of us. There should be only one way to do business in the city of Dallas, and that is above board. We cannot tolerate anything less. So with this working group and the recommendations I hope to see Chairman Powers and his group put forward, we can prove definitively that Dallas will never be defined by those past officials who violated our public trust. And with that, I'm going to turn it over for a few comments from Chairman Powers, and then we'll be happy to answer as many questions as we can. So thank you very much for being here. Chairman Powers.
Mayor Johnson, thank you very much. I will only say that I'm truly honored and humbled to have the opportunity to serve our great city in this role, and I will do with our working group the very best that I can to bring the ethics reform that our city and our citizens expect. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, can you talk about how the new ethics czar might have prevented a situation like we saw with former Councilman Dwayne Caraway?
Well, so that's a great question, but it's actually a pretty big question. What we're looking to do here is a complete top to bottom review of our ethics code. And what we want to find are from, as I pointed out, I think, to get all the way to the point of being investigated by the FBI, indicted by the United States Attorney, tried and prosecuted by the United States Attorney, and then convicted of a federal crime, is generally the end of a series of ethical failures. So what we are trying to do is look at our city's ethics code to find ways that are within our power to make our code one where we deter the types of behaviors that typically are at the beginning of a string of unethical acts that ultimately result in something like that. So let's talk about, for example, when you are campaigning for office. We want to start there. We want to start before you even take the oath and become an elected official. We want to look at the rules related to running for office and find the areas where our code basically almost invites people to violate our rules and carries no consequence. So during the last municipal election, we saw some violations of our city's ethics code with respect to exceeding campaign contribution limits, contributions being split amongst multiple people that were really probably coming from one source. Whether the actual law or the spirit of it was violated, the important thing is it certainly didn't pass the smell test in the public, and we want our code to reflect the transparency and I think the honesty that our people in the city expect. So we want to look at things like that. We want to strengthen our code so that there's more of a deterrent from doing something like that because the consequence will be greater. And we also want to make it clear in case it's ambiguous, in case maybe the reason you're not getting compliance is because someone doesn't understand what the rules say. We want to make it very clear. You cannot do X, you can do Y, and we want to make it a kind of code that is not so cumbersome and burdensome and ticky-tack that people are violating it by accident. So there's a lot of work to be done there, and that's the beginning of the process. And then all the way through service on the city council, service as mayor, there are rules that we want to look at and see if we can make them clearer and give them more teeth. Jack?
I'm just curious about the teeth. What in your mind does that entail? Does that entail the city just handling this itself, this ethics commission, or does that entail a Dallas County prosecutor?
I mean, I'm not gonna do the work for the chairman and his working group, but I would say this: they are going to be looking at. I expect them to look at what other cities are doing, and to look at what national best practices are, and to think about what it would take to sufficiently deter the types of behaviors that we've seen in our city. Now, some of these behaviors that we've seen are things that, frankly, we need help from Austin on, which I tried to work on last session and came up short of getting the legislation that I think would have actually helped give us a way to combat the type of corruption surrounding the affordable housing tax credit program, but the low-income housing tax credit program technically is what it's called. But what we can do at the local level to deter, I'm going to leave it to the committee to find those ways, but it could be anything from increasing the ability of our city attorney's office to actually investigate these and to bring more punishment to violators from within the city to, like you said, criminal prosecution. But we need to see what other people are doing and to see what has been effective in other places. But without a doubt, deterrence has to be a part of a working, functioning ethics code. And that's something that they'll be looking at.
Because the city attorney answers to council members, not T.C. Broad, that's my understanding.
The city attorney is a direct report to the city council. That is true. And so we have to look at all the different limitations that we have in our form of government that might make some solutions more workable or less workable than others. But trust me when I say this working group is going to be looking at every possible way to make all of us who are in city government more accountable to the people and to be reasonable and fair about it. We're not trying to create a situation where things that are not actually good, we don't want to punish people who are acting in good faith and trying to comply with the rules. What we are trying to root out are people who are trying to skirt the rules.
In talking about, who answers who in those roles, the city auditor is appointed by the city council as a whole. Is this a position that should be appointed by the city council as a whole?
Which position?
The new ethics czar. Should the city council be the one that votes on the ethics czar?
Oh, well, I want to make sure that I want to pick someone who is outside of City Hall to work outside of City Hall and then report back to us. And then ultimately it will have to be the council's decision on what to do. This will have to be briefed to a full council or to a committee, and ultimately council will have to speak on this. But I want the work initially to be done by folks who are not connected to the building. And I think the reasons for that are pretty clear. I mean, I want to make sure that we're getting the perspective of legal experts, the perspective of the citizenry and folks outside of this building on what we need to be doing better. So I didn't want it to be overly political, so we didn't do it as a council committee or a task force of the mayor. This is really going to be led by outside folks.
So
Go ahead, Mayor.
Yes, you talked about government and this code, everything you're going to be looking at. I know you heard about elected officials, but will this cover the entire city? Or will this cover employees, department heads, and how far into the ordinance?
Yes, this working group led by Chairman Powers is going to look at our entire code, which does apply to both elected and non-elected officials. So they are going to look at it in a complete overhaul, rewrite, reevaluation of the whole code from top to bottom to see what can be changed. So. No, I'm not singled out any particular department, any particular office of city government. I've targeted the code itself, the whole code, and said I really want a reevaluation of the entire code.
is this
Mayor, talk about clarity. Have you heard, you've been honest, any concerns from city officials about the ethics code being unclear, or that there has been some confusion in the past as to what's ethically acceptable or not in the city?
Have I heard any people say
Who
make
have
that
said that
comment?
they're concerned or that they don't understand the ethics code?
Well, I think that my own experience with it and talking to people who actually run for office in this city, that it could be written in more plain language, that's for sure. I'm an attorney myself, and I can tell you it's not always entirely clear exactly what the code is saying in certain places. And I do think that we saw in the last campaign, it's ambiguous, I think, in some people's minds, what some of the provisions mean with respect to the individual contribution limit and how that all works. We just want to make sure those things are crystal clear. And so we're going to go through that code and make sure that it is clear, because we want folks to have confidence in their code.
Is this, can you talk about is this a permanent position, or if people have ethics concerns, do they go to Chair Powers, or do they still go to the Ethics Commission?
Okay, let me clarify that. I think that's a great question. No, this is not a permanent. This is not a position of city government. It's not a permanent position. This is to catalyze the analysis of the ethics code that's then going to be reported back for city government, the city council specifically, to take up as an issue. This is not actually a substitute for the Ethics Advisory Commission. It happens to be that Chairman Powers is the chair of the Ethics Advisory Commission, but that's a separate function that's going to continue to do its job under the current code. But it is a possibility that in evaluating the code, that there can be a determination made that the way the Ethics Advisory Commission works may need to change, or the existence of it may need to be looked into, or how it's structured may need to change, and that may be something that this group recommends. But no, this is not a new part of our city government at all. I think I'll take one more question, and if anyone has any questions for Tim, you can ask them, and then we have to go.
Mayor, I did want to ask, it's been several weeks after the tornado. I know there was a briefing on Wednesday. How concerned are you that FEMA is not going to designate this area as, that would qualify for federal assistance?
Well, let me tell you what my understanding of how this program, the FEMA program works, and I'll tell you that at the end of the day, I have confidence of a couple things. I have confidence that we have, as a city, working with FEMA and working with the folks who are charged with actually assessing the damage, have put forward the very best case possible for reimbursement of some of our tornado-related expenses under federal guidance. I'm confident that we've assessed all the damage, we've calculated it, we've got everything included in our application for assistance. I'm also confident, having talked to the governor, we went in a helicopter last week and looked at damage, and he told me that he is committed to putting forward the very best case and making the strongest argument possible to the President of the United States for getting this declared a federal disaster. But my understanding is that it's ultimately the President of the United States' decision. It is his decision alone. Even if we hit the threshold for damage, which I believe we will, the $38 million that we need to hit in uninsured loss, I think we're hitting that number. It will be his determination as to whether or not we actually get any relief. And that is not something I can speculate on. I've not talked to the President directly about it, but I do believe that we are going to put forward the very best case for relief that you can. And we'll have to wait and see. He has, I think, 30 days from the time we make the application, the governor actually makes the request to act on it. So we'll hope that he actually does that.
Has that been made?
I think it's being finalized and about to be made by the governor. So, yes.
Chairman Powers, could we talk to you or ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay. Situations like City Hall faced recently with Mayor Pro Tem Dwayne Caraway, do you believe that a rewrite of the city's ethics code will be able to prevent that type of activity in the future?
What I think, and I think what the mayor hopes to achieve from all of this is the setting of expectations. And as you set expectations, our city is, and I personally believe this, the greatest city in the country to live in. I believe it's the greatest city in the country to do business in. I think we also want it to be recognized as the most ethical city in which to do business, whether at the business level or at the governmental level. I think that's Mayor Johnson's goal for us to achieve. And I think you start everything like you do in a family, like you do in a business, or anything else. You start it by setting expectations. I think much of what he wants to look at least that we've discussed thus far regarding reform, is the setting of those expectations and that they are clear, so that you're able to start at least that way and then build the rules from there.
How important is the teeth aspect that the mayor discussed, as far as not only laying out the expectations, but when there is a clear and cut violation, that there's actually something that you can hold these folks accountable?
Again, going back to what I believe to be the mayor's goals as we sit down and begin to discuss this in more detail, is that the ability to take appropriate remedial action such that the city or the ethics rules or the city attorney or otherwise can begin to impose the types of penalties or remedies that need to be done at the time would be important, such that as we talk about, as the mayor talked about, the slippery slope, that we never get to that. Again, setting the expectations to start off are what's important.
And Jeremy, what's your first plan of action? Where do you start?
Well, I think we have, with the mayor, we have to have some more discussion with what his expectations are and what his desires are, and then we'll put together a group of experts. Again, we want to look at what some of the other cities around the country have as the best practices, and we'll look to gather that and look to appoint some other members of this working group to be able to analyze that and make the recommendations. I'll report back to the city, to the mayor, and I expect the city council as to who it is that we will ask to also serve with me on this, and we'll work together. A small working group will work together and try to work quickly and bring this all together and complete it before the end of this next session.
Has it sometimes been frustrating for you as chair of the advisory commission? Have you found that there are certain situations that, maybe should go forward, but based on the city's ethics code, they couldn't?
I have not seen that yet, but I've only been the chair of the Ethics Advisory Board since Mayor Johnson's election, and we've addressed Councilmember Thomas' violation and think we've done it quickly. Thought the rules in that instance worked perfectly, but I think, again, going back to the mayor's point, it was the way that came about and how it came about. Some possible unintended consequences that resulted in a violation that the commission found is what we want the rules to be able to avoid. We want them to be clear. We maybe want to change the burden of reporting and who has to make those reports to be, in essence, be more clear, more crisp, and more determinative of how things go.
So you feel that Visit Dallas case is an example of the slippery slope, where maybe someone's not intending to do wrongdoing, but they don't know that it's wrong?
No.
Can you elaborate about that?
What does that mean?
Only that violation really was a failure, an unintended failure to report because they didn't have the right protocols in place. It was a really more of an administrative violation. You're really looking more to set a tone, set the expectations that will really prevent any of that from even starting to go forward, and make it very, very clear going forward. For example, should Visit Dallas have been the one that reported all of that to start off with, as opposed to the council member having to report those types of things, looking at where a burden for reporting would go, things like that.
How committed are you to creating some sort of, or more teeth to the ethics code, and what's the knowledge?
Well, I think, and again, we just started this and you're just announced the appointment, and we don't have our working group together yet, but again, I think what we want to do is to create to complement the best city to live in, the best city to work in. We want to create a friendly system of the most ethical city globally, if we can. And to do that, we want to have a code that's easy to understand, we want to have a code that's easy to enforce, and hopefully that because we've created this expectation and this type of culture within City Hall and within how we do business globally, that we will never have to really use it. It'll be there, but it will be there as guidelines as opposed to needing to use and enforce the teeth. But the teeth will be there, I'm sure. We'll come back to that.
Thank you, guys.